Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. I am your host, Todd Embley, and with me today is Thomas Yeoh, Managing Director at Baozun Asia. Thomas brings over 30 years of experience leading organizational transformation and M&A advisory in Southeast Asia and China. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Todd. Glad to be here.
All right, so where in the world are you located today that we're recording you from?
I am currently in Singapore. That's where I live, and that's where the headquarters for Baozun Asia is.
Okay, good. I don't want to get too much into trying to explain your vast and deep background, so I'm going to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, give an
hmm
introduction to yourself and walk us through some of your career as a technology executive.
Certainly, I started life as an roll up your sleeves engineer, and I was trained in that, and uh, and then quickly went into technology related, engineering related roles, both in the public sector here in Singapore as well as in the private sector. And that's taken me through, industries ranging from business services to, actually um, engineering type of businesses to financial services, venture capital, stockbroking, and recently here at Baozun Asia with e-commerce. But the common thread throughout my career is a focus on technology and its applications to business, developing businesses, using technology and also technology as a business in itself. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, excellent. We'd like to focus the conversation today on the Southeast Asian market.
Right.
So many of our listeners are consumer brands, own consumer brands, make the executive decisions for consumer brands and these people might be considering the expansion to the Southeast Asian region, right? I'd like to ask you to first, if you don't mind, paint us a picture from your point of view of the region. What are some of the biggest markets in that area of the world?
Okay. Well, Southeast Asia is, it's a region that comprises 10 countries effectively. And out of these 10 countries, six of them make up for about 80% of the market. And these six countries are, a small country like Singapore with only about 5.5, 6 million in population, to the largest country, in fact, the fourth largest country in the world, Indonesia, which has close to 270 million in population. And in between, you have, Thailand, which is about the size of, in terms of population, the size of France and the UK. You have the Philippines with just over 100 million in population. Vietnam close to 100 million in population. So these two countries are about, the size of Germany in terms of population. And then you have Malaysia, which is basically about 30 odd million in population. So about the size of Australia in terms of population. So, and by and large, Southeast Asian region populations are young, and it's still growing. The population growth is still there, except for maybe Singapore, which is relatively developed, a city. And as with a lot of developed countries, cities, population growth has, matured. All in, the Southeast Asian market is about 100 billion in terms of e-commerce, 100 billion US dollars. There's some estimates higher, about 140 odd billion dollars. But essentially, if you compare it to China, which is the largest in the world, Southeast Asia is maybe about 8 to 10% of China's, size in terms of e-commerce. So that's the Southeast Asian region in terms of market size and the countries that make up the largest in terms of markets and business. It is also a very culturally diverse region. All these six countries,
Mm,
in fact, the 10 countries that I mentioned, they have different languages. Some languages even with their own writing, which is not Roman character. Um, and then, of course, you have different laws, different customs and duties, for your products. So it is a very colorful region in that sense. But in terms of business, it also introduces complexity. It's not, one size fits all for all of these countries. Take the affordability, for instance. Um, you have like tiny Singapore, which has per capita GDP, which is almost the same as the US. Um, on the other hand, you have, Vietnam with about 100 million population, but the per capita GDP is, closer to like 3,000 US dollars, but growing quickly. So in terms of affordability and the suitability for specific products, price ranges, and so on, you know, you have to, not every market would be suitable for, say, a specific product.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and you mentioned that the Southeast Asia would be about 8 to 10%
hmm,
of China. Yet it is about 40% of China's population.
right.
So obviously there's a disparity there.
Yep,
And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on why, and I'm sure they're closing the gap quickly,
right.
but why would there be a gap in those two numbers?
Well, firstly, the infrastructure in China, uh, by and large, is a lot better in than all the countries. In fact, most of the countries in Southeast Asia. Which means that logistics and delivery, right? If you live in China, you're spoiled in terms of, same day delivery. When you order
Yeah.
something, next day delivery throughout this very vast country that is China. But in Southeast Asia, you could be looking at, sometimes 2 weeks delivery because the infrastructure is, not as developed. Maybe the geography is a lot more challenging because if you go to the Philippines and Indonesia, you have a lot of islands, and if air connectivity is not as good, and you have to rely on boats and ferries and so on, it'll take time. So that's, I think, one of the reasons: logistics, the infrastructure. Secondly, I think it is also the penetration of internet. If you go to a place like Indonesia about 10 years ago, before smartphones really took off, uh, desktop internet penetration was only in the, maybe 30% thereabouts, 40% at most. It is only in the last 10 years when smartphones really, the costs for smartphones came down and penetration went up in places like Indonesia. Today, Indonesia is the largest e-commerce market in Southeast Asia with, estimated to be half of the whole of Southeast Asia in terms of e-commerce. So the penetration rate was slower than in China. I think China's smartphone penetration rate was a lot higher. You take a mobile service provider like China Mobile, they have nearly 1 billion users. And between China Mobile, China Telecom, China Unicom, the three big telcos there, you have penetration rates in excess of 100% in China. So I think these are the two key reasons, in terms of the infrastructure, why people are, why the penetration rate is less in Southeast Asia compared to China. Yeah, but therein lies
Yeah.
the opportunity. Now that the
Mhm.
penetration rates for, to the internet has improved, and especially over the last 2, 3 years with the COVID lockdowns, a lot of people who would not have bought anything had bought something during the COVID lockdown out of necessity. And from that experience, I don't think, they would not use the, they would not use e-commerce and going forward. They certainly will. So I think that is a big bump in terms of penetration during the COVID period. That will, I think, carry over and persist, going forward. So I think Southeast Asia's growth in terms of narrowing that penetration of e-commerce in society is going to increase going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we all noticed that COVID helped speed up the adoption of e-commerce, the comfortability of shopping online, because people may not have had the choice. They may not have, wherever they may live, in order to get certain things, that was really their only option. So they were forced to learn and forced to get comfortable. And there you go. And you're absolutely right about logistics. I mentioned it a couple podcasts ago as well. When I was a much younger man, I used to wear the brown. So I worked for UPS. I was in freight forwarding for a little bit as a young person. And so I'm always fascinated. In China, you're right. I mean, the geography, you can't, that's something that you really can't change until drones are delivering everything. China is this nice, beautiful, almost round, kind of like Australia. It's just this, you just look at it. Well, if the maps are correct, then and it looks like a nice place to be able to just throw down a bunch of tracks and run everything by train and truck, and then you get into town and the Sherpas, that's that old delivery service from Shanghai, but on the mopeds and everything, they're running everything all over the place, and it is they are completely spoiled by the logistics of that they get to enjoy there. And of course, if you look at the geography, if you look at the map and look at Southeast Asia, you have to imagine that it has to be much, much more difficult. And you beat me to the punch on the question I was going to ask you about, which was like that internet penetration and the maturity of the adoption of being online. So I'm glad you touched on that. I guess one other thing that I'd like to maybe ask before we really jump into some things is payments.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about different cultures, we talked about different languages, and the difficulties of logistics. What does payments look like across the region?
Well, payment infrastructure is, in fact, I would say, got a shot in the arm over the last few years with e-commerce, and certainly during the COVID period, where cash was king. And during COVID, people got really wary of, exchanging anything physical, you know.
Mm.
Even menus, touching menus at restaurants during the COVID period when we could go to restaurants, people were a bit queasy. So QR codes started showing up in restaurants. People would scan the QR code for the menu, ordering it online, and then along with it, digital payment really ramped up because then you don't have to deal with the cash. Um, Consumers started using them because they don't want to get change from whoever they bought something from on the touch anything. So I think digital payment infrastructure is certainly developing rapidly in Southeast Asia. Each country has its own dominant local payment infrastructure. Most of the um, central banks, if you will, the government in each Southeast Asian country, I have not heard of any or seen any that is not pushing, digital payment. And I can see that, in the countries that I go to, that we have presence in Southeast Asia, in most of them, you can see local payment being very widely used, not only in e-commerce, like when you're buying or shopping for something, but also in the restaurants, in daily life. So I can see more of it going there. The penetration is not as high as in China, but it is definitely rapidly, growing in terms of the acceptance. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you very much for breaking that down for me as well. Um, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about some of the key regional economic trends that are really making Southeast Asia a very, very attractive place for brands to expand into.
Yeah, I think, for Southeast Asia, um, the economies are growing and a lot of manufacturing investments continue to be made in Southeast Asia. You take Vietnam, for instance, I think they are a key beneficiary of many of the factories making apparel, making some of the consumer products that have relocated from China, because of cost reasons, because of U.S.-China bifurcation. Um, so Vietnam, for instance, is a good example of how investments have lifted the general GDP per capita of the country. And you have very young population there who's very hungry. And so with that will lead to a growth in the middle class, right? And their affordability and their income levels. So I think that is an example of how Southeast Asia is going to continue to grow. And you look at Indonesia, where in the past, I think, some of the labor legislation have been a bit restrictive in terms of,
Mm,
you know, um, attracting, investments, manufacturing investments in particular, as we are going to do exports. You wouldn't put Indonesia on a very high priority because of some of these labor laws. But today, that's changing. And in itself, Indonesia is a large market with 270 million people. You know, you could have car factories in Indonesia just to supply the local population, right? And if you look at Thailand, again, it is the tourists are coming back. They are a very tourism is a big factor in their economy, and that's
hmm
coming back after COVID. Not only that, I think on the industrial side, new car factories are being set up. BYD, which is
mm,
China's number one electric vehicle maker, has announced they will set up a factory there. Great Wall Motors, another China, passenger car maker, is also going to set up a factory in Thailand doing EVs and so on. So you have these developments, investments into Southeast Asia that is going to increase the living standards and the income of the middle class. And so the middle class is going to grow in Southeast Asia. And as the
mm.
middle class grows, they're going to be able to spend more. And the consumer market, therefore, in Southeast Asia has a lot of potential.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about the rise of e-commerce, and feel free to mention anything about the historical whys and hows, anything that moved. I mean, we touched on COVID,
Mm.
but I don't know if there's any other motivators or leaders or levers that kind of played a role in helping it rise, because it has risen greatly. And what are the largest e-commerce platforms that everybody should know about operating in that region?
Well, I think one of the key drivers in e-commerce in Southeast Asia is overcoming, the trust factor, you know,
Mm,
the trust factor. I'll give an example. An old colleague of mine, a young man in Jakarta, 5 years ago, he wouldn't get online because, he was afraid that if he bought something and, the stuff came and it wasn't what it was made out to be, and he'd already paid the money, and he didn't want to go through that trouble, right? He would go to a shop,
Mm-hmm.
um, see that, okay, this is exactly what I want, and this is the price, and I'm willing to pay for it. I get what I pay for. So one of the key factors is that, and I think, but 2 years later, he was buying his mobile phone online. Okay, and
Yeah.
what made the difference, I was very curious when I chat with him. He says, yeah, I mean, I bought a few things now, quite a few things over the last 2 years, and 90% I have no problem with it, and even the 10% I was able to return it. So that trust factor, he had overcome it. And today, of course, he will continue to spend online because, in Jakarta, if you had to go to a shop that is, say, 5 kilometers away, it could take you, if you went at the wrong time, it could take you, an hour or two. So you don't want to break that kind of traffic jam if you could get something delivered to your house or to your office. So the convenience is there. Overcoming that trust factor um, is key to developing this. And I think it's not all done. I can assure you. You go to Philippines and Vietnam today, for instance, you still get like certain reports like 50 or even up to 70% of e-commerce deliveries, are cash on delivery. you know although there's
Wow.
all there's although there's digital payment, they don't want to use it. Sometimes it's lack of trust. Sometimes it could be perhaps even taking advantage of the situation. And if you're not careful, I've seen warehouses where they have rows and rows of return goods, and it's too expensive to send it back to the manufacturer in China. So what do you do with them? Uh, they find a way to get rid of
Create
them.
another platform.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's a business opportunity in itself. I'm sure somebody's
Yeah.
doing it. So
Yeah.
you still have those issues, but I think by and large, those issues are being addressed, and it's thanks to the two big players in the region, Shopee and Lazada. Uh,
Mm.
Lazada's a subsidiary of Alibaba. They have a lot of experience. Shopee is probably close to 50% of e-commerce business transactions in Southeast Asia. They're present in all
Wow.
the major economies, and so is Lazada. Lazada is a bit probably the number two in terms of those with regional footprints. So these are the two key guys. But TikTok has come up very, very strongly. TikTok today, from 2021, I'm just looking at some numbers from 2021, they were just doing about, let me just get the number here to make sure I don't get the
Get it
numbers
right.
wrong. Just bear with me a
Yeah.
minute. Yeah,
No
in
problem.
2021, the gross merchandise value (GMV) of sales on TikTok Shop in Southeast Asia was like 600 million US dollars. Small, if you're looking at a 100 billion market, right? But in 2022, in the space of 1 year, it grew to 4.4 billion US dollars. So that's like an eightfold,
Yeah.
nearly eightfold
7, 8.
increase. So they're growing rapidly, and can attest to that when I visit TikTok in Jakarta. Their office is just expanding like crazy, and there's a whole ecosystem evolving now in Indonesia where they started their TikTok shop, of live streamers and agents and so on. It's amazing how that's growing so rapidly. So it's going to be a platform that has to be reckoned with if you are going to come into the Southeast Asian market. Um, if I get my numbers right, in Indonesia alone, there are like 80 million. So you're looking at like nearly 1 in 3 Indonesian is a TikTok user. Yeah. So
So the, I mean, influencer marketing is very influential,
Yeah.
is what you're saying, like that. And I'd like to ask just your opinion on, and this could be part of another answer as well, but how relevant is influencer marketing? How relevant are short video platforms, as I'm sure we just could take away from everything that you just said? But um, obviously, it's grown. And I just like your take on how important it is for brands to potentially consider that as part of your Southeast Asia entry strategy, is that you are looking at influencer marketing, or is that something that isn't as important as you might think and it can wait?
No, I think it's very important, right? If you're, let's say, the price points for TikTok Shop transactions is right now still relatively low. Okay, so if you're selling at $20, $30, that's tops in place like Indonesia. I'm talking US
Mm,
dollars.
yeah.
So if your merchandise is of a lower cost and all that, definitely it's a good platform for transaction. But if your products are $100, $200, it may not be a platform for transacting that kind of products today, right? But at the very least, TikTok is a platform for influencer marketing. May not be sales, but definitely
Mm,
marketing. Get your image up there, and you can build on your image because there's so many, there's more and more users of TikTok, and they tend to be relatively younger, right? So if you're trying to reach that demographics, even from a marketing perspective, a branding perspective, put your content out there, um, and then that could lead to the more traditional e-commerce or offline stores that you operate in the country in Southeast Asia. So whether you're high end, which you go for, brand building on TikTok, or if you're, in the price range that TikTok users are very frequenting today, in terms of the transactions, then you could actually sell your products on TikTok as well. And I
mm,
believe that, as with many platforms in the past, um, as the trust level goes up with time and with increasing usage and familiarity, the transaction value will start going up. TikTok started in Indonesia, where GDP per capita is less than 4,000 US. So it is natural that some of the transaction values, the average transaction value, is relatively low. But with the success in 2022, TikTok is now expanding the shop, TikTok shop, to the other five, countries, the major markets in Southeast Asia, including Singapore. So, we can see that the average transaction value, the average GMV on TikTok Shop is, in my view, going to go up. It's going to trend upwards. Yeah.
right. So, given that regional scope of platforms like Lazada and Shopee, I think it's fair to view Southeast Asia as one e commerce ecosystem. It might be naive to say that from not being in the region. So I apologize to you if that is definitely wrong in for somebody who is there. But think of your from Europe or from North America, you might just see it as one kind of big region, which again would be naive, I know, but we are noting that there are major differences, sometimes small differences in the regions. So, how would you compare the Southeast Asia e commerce ecosystem to that in China or the United States?
Well, I think, if you go online and order something, if you went to Shopee or Lazada, uh, you also will be going to country-specific Shopees or Lazada.
Mm,
Okay.
mm,
The reason being because when you actually do the delivery of a physical stuff, right, it is country bound, right? You
yeah.
need to hold stock in country. That's the preferred way. Or alternatively, you can drop ship, but that's going to be costly, right? So you're still confined by the delivery side because that's where the tire hits the road, and you can't run away from that. So the difference between Southeast Asia and China in a big way is that, or perhaps even the US. I don't know that much about the US, so I won't labor on that point. But certainly in China, you can be sitting in, Chengdu, and you order from a manufacturer who's in, in Jiangsu province, and that doesn't make any difference, right? It's one set of logistics. They've organized it throughout the country. It gets delivered to you in Chengdu. But if you're sitting in, let's say, Singapore, and you order something from a factory in Vietnam, that has to get shipped through, customs in Singapore and so on and so forth. So that's the complexity of Southeast Asia. That's the difference.
If you were an international brand
Hmm.
coming out there, would would it make more sense to either put distribution facilities in maybe the top 4 or 5 and focus there, or would you go with maybe 1 or 2 but in free trade zones, but at least you're closer, and then maybe operate out of a free trade zone environment, sending to wherever it needs to go?
Well, we think, having looked at Southeast Asia, what we have done at Baozun, maybe I'll give that as an example. Uh, we have put our regional logistics hub in Malaysia, right? Malaysia, why? Because it has good connectivity throughout the whole of Southeast Asia, right?
Mm.
And its cost is relatively low. Let's say if you compare it to Singapore, right? You can put it in Singapore, but it's relatively expensive. A cubic meter of space in Singapore costs a lot more than a cubic meter of space in Malaysia. Of
Yeah.
course, that cubic meter of space will cost even less in say Indonesia or the Philippines, but then the logistics connectivity might end up costing you more. So on the balance, considering all the various factors, we put it in Malaysia. And what we have offered and make it easy for a lot of the brands that we serve is that we will then offer them kind of put their stuff in Malaysia, and as the different markets that they try to reach in Southeast Asia, you can basically ship them out from Malaysia, and we have sort of partners
Mm-hmm.
in the other Southeast Asian countries, so kind of like a 3PL, and so that probably in our view is the best way to do it for a start, and then of course if let's say Indonesia becomes a major market for the brand's products over time, then at some point it will make sense to have inventory in Indonesia, and that goes with the other Southeast Asian markets. So that's how we think is a good way to get started in Southeast Asia.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's talk hottest consumer sectors. What are the hottest consumer sectors right now in Southeast Asia?
Well, fashion, apparel, these are, at top of the list. Beauty, as affordability goes up, the beauty products are also, in great demand. Household products, household products, because it's a young population generally in Southeast Asia, and people are setting up, new households, getting married, they buy their apartment, and they need to furnish it, white goods and so on, and of course electronics, right? Everybody's on their mobile phone. It's still a growing market in Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. That all sounds on par with I might have expected.
Yeah.
And you look very sharply dressed, by the way. I'm jealous of your shirt. For those of you who are
I
watching us in video.
I'm wearing a batik shirt that I got from Jakarta.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's interesting, because I've been going over to I'm traveling over Southeast Asia for many years, and I've gone to Indonesia like before COVID almost every month, for the past 10 years or so. And
yeah.
over time, uh, they've gotten more, how would I put it, culturally confident maybe, to the
Mm-hmm.
extent that on Fridays in Jakarta now, everybody wears batik to the office, so
Oh,
yeah,
casual Fridays.
casual
Casual
Fridays.
Fridays have shown
Yeah,
up.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh,
Yeah,
that's good to know.
yeah.
Okay, so I mean, and I mean, we talked about a little bit about the TikTok, but what about the Kwai Show as well? And how relevant compared to TikTok is Kwai Show?
Quite sure it's really not in Southeast Asia yet.
Mm.
So, I can't say that much, but I can tell you that, Red or
Well,
Xiaohongshu,
sorry, let me rephrase that. Kwai
mm,
Show compared to TikTok, they're battling in China.
yeah.
But is there a Kwai Show version or similar competitor in Southeast Asia that's on the rise? That's a better question.
Okay. The ones that's on the right in Southeast Asia is Xiaohongshu. That's Little Red
Little
Book.
Red Book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Xiaohongshu is getting very popular in Southeast Asia.
Okay.
So I think Kuaishou is not here in Southeast Asia, and
Mm.
Xiaohongshu I think will give TikTok a run for the money going forward. Yeah,
Oh
they've got
wow.
yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay, good. Now, if I want to do social media marketing or I'm heading up, I just found out our brand, we are taking a $100 million strategy to enter Southeast Asia. I've been tasked to do social media marketing in the area. What are the platforms that I'm going to start researching?
Well, the popular ones are Facebook, Instagram, and now TikTok. Uh, Social media marketing, these are the three that I think you want to look at. A lot of live streaming going on those three platforms in Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Yeah. Are they used similarly? I mean, now that you say that, I'm like thinking, okay, good. I actually, being a social media manager for whatever brand I'm working for, I should know
Mm,
all those things. So,
mm.
no problem. But what, and I maybe ask you, what are some nuances to those platforms in how they operate and how they're viewed? What does the competition for attention look like in that region, and how is it different than in the West?
Um, For Facebook, as the demographics of Facebook users, people that look like me, and for perhaps yourself too, Todd, but you look a lot younger, so maybe you're kind of in between Facebook and Instagram. Um, and TikTok definitely for the even the younger crowd, and very
Mhm.
interesting conversation I had with my daughter, for instance. I said, hey, how would you differentiate Instagram and TikTok? And her reply just hit me. It says, well, most of the young people, we go to TikTok because our parents aren't there yet. Yeah, they're starting to get into Instagram, so it's getting uncomfortable.
Yeah,
So yeah,
so they can sneak around and create
yeah,
content without their parents watching.
yeah, exactly. So I've at random, just going through my TikTok, I've seen friends, kids, on TikTok doing their dance and doing all kinds of stuff. And sometimes when we get together, I'll tell them, "Hey, I saw you on TikTok," and they're like, "Oh, you're on
Yeah.
TikTok?" Yeah. So
Now they're going to look for a new platform.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm not that young. I actually turned 50
Uh-huh.
in 1 month. So
Ah,
now I just got to try to keep up with what my kids are going to be using.
yeah.
Okay, let's wrap this up with a final question.
Mm.
Talking to all our brand owners out there, what are, in your opinion and in your experience, the key pillars of a successful entry strategy into Southeast Asia for brands? What are the main, let's say, 3 to 4 things they really need to get right?
Well, first of all, I think you need to understand that if your benchmark, right, of what
Mm.
you define as success. Southeast Asia, if you lump it all into one, as I said earlier on, is not even 10% of China. Okay, that's one. But that's just the average. Of course, some brands, they do a lot better in Southeast Asia than in China. And there are many that,
Mm-hmm.
of course, do a lot better in China than in Southeast Asia. So it really depends on your product and what you want to do. Um, so bear in mind that your benchmark, and also bear in mind the cultural diversity that is Southeast Asia and the affordability levels. You have like Singapore with GDP per capita upwards of 50,000 US dollars per capita. You have Vietnam, which is like close to 3,000. And you have those in between like Thailand and, Malaysia, closer to 10,000. So you need to, be able to identify, which are the segments in, cut it down a bit more. So do a bit more analysis where you want to, where you want to target, because yes, it's a nice term, Southeast Asia, but within there, there's a lot of diversity. And you want to be more specific in terms of where you want to try and target, right? And then the third thing that you want to be very clear about is, to have good people on the ground, whether it's with partners, working with partners or having your own people. You need to have locals who understand the local place. You don't want to have, for instance, your products get stuck in a customs warehouse, in a warehouse because the customs guys, have problems with it, and that could drag on, and it can be a mess. You don't want to do that, especially if you're going to 6 major countries in Southeast Asia and you have to deal with all these various places on a one-to-one basis. It can get a bit taxing, especially if you're halfway around the world. You need to have local people, therefore, to be able to help you to do all those things. Reliable people, whether it's through partners or whether you have your own team. So I would say those are the key things. And maybe the fourth thing is that as you market to the culturally diverse Southeast Asia, your marketing message also needs to be in tune with the local marketplaces. Yeah. So for instance,
Yeah.
even although China is very close in terms of geographic proximity to Southeast Asia, but culturally it's quite different too. And I often have to remind my colleagues in China as well that what works in China does not necessarily work in Southeast Asia. You have to
Yeah.
adapt it to the Southeast Asian environment. And I think that's very true of branding and product messaging and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're in France
Mm.
and you think that marketing has to be different for Germany, you can understand.
Yeah.
If you're in the US and you understand that marketing in Mexico needs to be very different, then you can understand. Southeast Asia, as much as we'd love to just make it one homogenous area for e-commerce and marketing, it isn't. It takes thought, it takes intent, it takes preparedness, it takes research and understanding. And I like what you said about benchmarking success before you go. I think that's a very, very wise move and very sage advice. So, Thomas, I know you got to run. And why do you have to run? Because you're a very busy person being the managing director of Baozun Asia. Thomas, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Todd. Thanks for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
All right. As usual, for everybody listening to us just on the podcast audio only, don't forget that we have the YouTube channel on the WPIC YouTube channel. You can get the full episode or the shorts over there. And for those of you who just want to see and use or switch over to the audio version while listening to this, We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, everywhere that you get your podcasts. But from me, the WPIC team, the negotiation team, and for Thomas Yeoh, thank you very much for listening today, and we'll see you next time.